I never thought shoveling snow would land me in a legal battle. But that's exactly what happened when I cleared my driveway 15 minutes too fast for the Pine Ridge Homeowners Association. My name is Paul Fischer, and I'd been living in Pine Ridge, Colorado for 3 years when this whole mess started. The subdivision sat on the outskirts of Boulder, one of those planned communities where every house looked like it came from the same catalog, and the HOA ruled with an iron fist. I'd bought my place in 2022, a nice 3-bedroom colonial with a decent yard and a long driveway that curved up from the street. The neighborhood was quiet, the neighbors mostly kept to themselves, and I figured I could live out my days here without much trouble. I should have known better. The woman who ran the HOA was named Karen Northfield, and she was exactly what you'd picture when you heard that name. Mid-50s, highlighted blonde hair cut in a sharp bob, always wearing athletic wear even though I'd never seen her exercise, and carrying a tablet everywhere she went to document violations. She'd been the HOA president for 7 years, and from what I'd heard from the neighbors who'd been around longer, she treated the position like she was running a small country. The trouble started on January 8, 2026. Colorado had been hit with a massive snowstorm the night before, one of those winter blasts that dumped nearly 2 feet of snow across the Front Range. I woke up around 6 in the morning to find my entire driveway buried, my car looking like an igloo in the garage port, and the street plowed but leaving massive berms at the end of everyone's driveways. I'd been through this before. I had a solid snow blower, a Toro 826 that I'd bought my first winter here, and I knew the drill. Get out early, clear the driveway before the snow got packed down, and make sure I could get to work. I worked as an IT consultant for a firm downtown, and while I could work remotely most days, I had an important client meeting that afternoon that required me to be in the office. I bundled up in my winter gear, started the snow blower, and got to work. The machine chewed through the snow like butter, and I made quick work of the driveway. The whole job took me maybe 40 minutes, and by 7:15, I had a clear path from my garage to the street. I even cleared the sidewalk in front of my house, which according to city ordinance, I had to do within 24 hours of snowfall. I was standing there, admiring my handiwork and feeling pretty good about starting the day productively, when I saw Karen's white Lexus SUV crawling down the street. She drove slowly, her head swiveling from side to side like she was on patrol. When she reached my house, she stopped. I waved, trying to be neighborly. She didn't wave back. Instead, she pulled out her tablet, took several photos of my driveway, and then drove on. That should have been my first warning. I went inside, showered, had breakfast, and headed to work. The roads were messy but passable, and I made it to the office with time to spare. The client meeting went well, and I felt like the day was shaping up nicely. I got home around 6 that evening, tired but satisfied. There was an envelope taped to my front door. I pulled it down, already feeling a sense of dread. The return address was the Pine Ridge HOA. I opened it right there on my front porch, the cold air biting at my fingers. It was a violation notice. According to the document, I had violated Section 14, Paragraph 8 of the HOA bylaws, which stated that all snow removal must be completed in a manner that does not create excessive noise disturbance during quiet hours. Quiet hours, apparently, were from 10 p.m. to 8 a.m. on weekdays. I'd started clearing my driveway at 6:30 in the morning. I'd finished by 7:15. The fine was $300. I stood there, reading the notice 3 times, convinced I was misunderstanding something. But no, it was clear. Karen had determined that my snow blower was too loud, that I'd started too early, and that I owed the HOA $300 for the privilege of clearing my own driveway so I could get to work. I went inside and immediately pulled up the HOA bylaws on my computer. I'd received a copy when I bought the house, but like most people, I'd skimmed through it and filed it away. Now I read every word of Section 14. The noise ordinance was there, buried in the middle of a long paragraph about maintaining peaceful enjoyment of the neighborhood. But there was something else too. Section 14, paragraph 12 stated that all driveways and walkways must be cleared of snow within 12 hours of snowfall ending, with priority given to emergency vehicle access. The snow had stopped around 5 a.m. By the bylaw's own rules, I had until 5 p.m. to clear my driveway. But I'd done it early, being responsible, and now I was being fined for it. I called the HOA office the next morning. A bored-sounding woman named Linda answered. "Pine Ridge HOA, how can I help you?" "Hi, this is Paul Fischer from 2847 Meadowbrook Lane. I received a violation notice yesterday, and I think there's been a mistake. Hold, please." She put me on hold before I could say anything else. Music played for 3 minutes, then Karen's voice came on the line. "Mr. Fischer, this is Karen Northfield, HOA president. I understand you're calling about your violation notice." "Yes, I am. I cleared my driveway yesterday morning and I got fined for doing it too early. But the bylaws say I have 12 hours to clear snow, and I was well within that time frame." "The 12-hour rule is a maximum, Mr. Fischer. It doesn't override our noise ordinance. Your snow blower was clearly audible at 7 in the morning, which is within our designated quiet hours." "By 1 hour," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "I started at 6:30 and was done by 7:15, and I had to get to work. What am I supposed to do, call in late because I can't clear my driveway until 8? "You could have cleared it manually with a shovel," Karen said, her tone suggesting this was obvious. "Or you could have cleared it the night before." It was still snowing the night before, and manually shoveling 2 feet of snow would have taken me 3 hours. "Nevertheless, the rules are clear. The fine stands. You have 30 days to pay." "This is ridiculous," I said, my frustration boiling over. "I'm being fined for being responsible and clearing my driveway so I could get to work." "You're being fined for violating community standards," Karen corrected. "If you'd like to appeal, you can submit a written request to appear before the HOA board at our next meeting. That's February 12th. "Fine," I said. "I'll be there." "The request must be submitted in writing within 10 days. "Good day, Mr. Fischer." She hung up. I sat there, phone in hand, seething. This was insane, but I wasn't going to pay $300 for doing something I was supposed to do. I typed up an appeal letter that afternoon and dropped it off at the HOA office, which was located in a small building near the subdivision entrance. The next few weeks were tense. I followed every HOA rule to the letter, making sure Karen couldn't find anything else to cite me for. My grass was dormant, so that wasn't an issue. My trash cans were stored out of sight. My house numbers were visible. Everything was perfect. January rolled into February, and we got another snowstorm on February 3rd. This one wasn't as bad, only about 8 inches, but it was enough to require clearing. I learned my lesson. I waited until exactly 8:01 a.m. to start my snow blower. It took me about 25 minutes to clear everything. As I was finishing up, my neighbor from across the street, a retired teacher named George, walked over. He was in his 70s, a friendly guy who'd lived in Pine Ridge since the subdivision was built. "Heard about your fine," he said, shaking his head. "That's Karen for you. She's been getting worse every year." "Has she always been like this?" I asked. "Pretty much, but it's gotten more extreme." Last year she tried to fine the Hendersons because their Christmas lights were the wrong shade of white, said they were too blue-tinted. Before that, she went after the Patel family because their daughter's birthday party balloons were visible from the street. "That's insane," I said. "You're not wrong, but nobody wants to fight her. She's got the board in her pocket. They vote however she tells them to, and she's got a lawyer on retainer who lives in the neighborhood. It's easier just to pay the fines and move on." "I'm not paying this one," I said. "It's the principle of it." George looked at me with something like pity. "Good luck with that. Just be careful. She's vindictive when people challenge her." I should have listened to him. February 12th arrived, and I drove to the community center where the HOA meetings were held. It was a Thursday evening, cold and clear. I'd prepared my case carefully, printing out copies of the relevant bylaws, photos of my driveway, and a timeline showing that I'd finished before the morning rush hour started. The meeting room was set up like a small courtroom. Karen sat in the middle of a long table with 4 board members flanking her, 2 on each side. There was a podium for speakers and several rows of folding chairs for residents. About a dozen people were scattered through the chairs, most of them looking bored or resigned. Karen called the meeting to order at 7 p.m. sharp. They went through standard business first, approving minutes, discussing budget items, and addressing minor maintenance issues around the subdivision. Then they got to violations and appeals. "Our first appeal tonight is from Paul Fischer regarding a noise violation on January 8th, Karen announced. "Mr. Fischer, you have 5 minutes to present your case." I stood and walked to the podium, my papers in hand. I laid out my argument clearly. I'd cleared my driveway during a reasonable morning hour. I'd finished well before most people were even awake. I'd done so to meet my work obligations, and the bylaws encouraged prompt snow removal for safety reasons. I pointed out the contradiction between the 12-hour rule and the noise ordinance. "The rules need to work together," I concluded. "You can't fine people for clearing snow too fast when you also require it to be done quickly. That's a catch-22. Karen listened with a neutral expression. When I finished, she consulted briefly with the board members, though I noticed she did most of the talking while they just nodded. "Mr. Fischer, we appreciate you taking the time to present your appeal. However, the board finds that the violation was appropriately issued. The noise ordinance exists to protect all residents' quality of life, and it supersedes the convenience of any individual homeowner. You had multiple options available to you that would have allowed you to clear your driveway without disturbing the peace. The fine stands. Next item." "Wait," I said, not moving from the podium. "You didn't even discuss it. You just decided." "We discussed it," Karen said coolly. "The decision is final unless you want to pursue mediation, which would cost you a $200 mediation fee on top of your existing fine." I looked at the board members. None of them would meet my eyes. They were all middle-aged or older, all looking uncomfortable but not willing to speak up. "This is a scam," I said, my voice rising. "You're just collecting fines, not actually enforcing reasonable rules." "Mr. Fischer, you're out of order. Please sit down or leave the meeting." I gathered my papers and walked out, my face hot with anger and embarrassment. Behind me, I heard Karen move on to the next item as if nothing had happened. I sat in my car for 10 minutes, trying to calm down. Then I drove home, my mind racing. George had been right. This was a rigged game, but I wasn't going to play it. Over the next week, I did research. I looked into HOA law in Colorado, read through case studies, and joined online forums where people discussed HOA nightmares. What I found was both encouraging and depressing. On one hand, HOAs had significant power and could make homeowners' lives miserable. On the other hand, they weren't above the law, and if they overstepped, they could be held accountable. I decided I wasn't going to pay the fine. Let them try to enforce it. In the meantime, I'd follow their rules to the absolute letter. That's when the idea started forming. Another snowstorm was forecasted for the last week of February. This one was supposed to be bigger than the first two, potentially dropping 18 to 24 inches across the Boulder area. The Weather Service was already calling it a significant winter storm event. I started paying attention to the street layout in Pine Ridge. Our subdivision had one main entrance off Highway 36, which connected to Meadowbrook Lane, the street I lived on. Meadowbrook ran in a loop, with various smaller streets branching off it. My house was positioned on a curve of Meadowbrook, and my long driveway meant that when snow accumulated, the end of my driveway, combined with the street's snowbanks, created a significant bottleneck. More importantly, I noticed something I'd never really thought about before. The fire station that served our area was on the other side of the subdivision. To reach the eastern half of Pine Ridge, where about 60% of the homes were located, emergency vehicles had to come through the main entrance, travel down Meadowbrook, and pass directly in front of my house. It was the only route large emergency vehicles could take because of how the streets were laid out. Section 14, Paragraph 12 of the bylaws clearly stated that driveways must be cleared to maintain emergency vehicle access. But I wasn't going to clear mine during quiet hours. And I wasn't going to do it manually. The storm hit on February 25th, a Wednesday. It started snowing around noon and didn't stop for 26 hours. I watched it pile up, fascinated. The snow kept coming, heavy and wet, the kind that was perfect for building snowmen and terrible for moving. By Thursday morning, we had close to 2 feet, with drifts in some places reaching 3 feet. The subdivision's snow removal service cleared the main streets, but as always, they left massive berms at the ends of driveways. The berm at the end of mine was particularly impressive, probably 4 feet high and 12 feet long, a wall of packed snow and ice from the plow's blade. I didn't touch it. Thursday morning came and went. 8 a.m. passed, the end of quiet hours. I stayed inside, working from home, watching through my window. Around 9, I saw George clearing his driveway across the street. He waved at me. I waved back but didn't go out. By noon, most of my neighbors had cleared their driveways. Mine remained buried. Around 2 p.m. my doorbell rang. I opened it to find Karen standing there, tablet in hand. "Mr. Fischer, your driveway hasn't been cleared." "I'm aware," I said pleasantly. "The snow stopped at 2 p.m. yesterday. You have until 2 a.m. tomorrow to clear it per the bylaws." "Actually," I said, pulling out my phone where I'd bookmarked the relevant section, "I have 12 hours from when the snowfall ends. It's currently been less than 12 hours. Her jaw tightened. The snow stopped falling earlier than 2 p.m. According to the National Weather Service, the last recorded snowfall in Boulder was 1:58 p.m. yesterday. I've got the timestamp, so I have until 1:58 a.m. tomorrow. Mr. Fischer, this is childish. No, this is following the rules. Isn't that what you wanted?" She took a photo of my driveway. "If this isn't cleared by tomorrow morning, you'll receive another violation. If it's not cleared by 2 a.m., then sure, I'll accept that violation, but I'm not clearing it before 8 a.m., quiet hours." We stared at each other for a long moment. I could see her mind working, trying to find an angle. Finally, she turned and walked back to her Lexus, her boots crunching in the snow. I went back inside, feeling a small sense of victory. Friday morning arrived. I'd set my alarm for 7:55 a.m. I got dressed in my snow gear, had my coffee, and at exactly 8:01 a.m. I went outside to start clearing. That's when things got interesting. I just started the snow blower, had cleared maybe 3 feet of driveway when I heard sirens. Fire trucks were coming down Highway 36, heading toward Pine Ridge. I paused, watching. The trucks turned into the subdivision entrance, their lights flashing. They tried to come down Meadowbrook Lane. I say tried because they couldn't get past my house. The combination of my uncleared driveway's snow berm, the narrow street, and the snowbanks on both sides created an impassable bottleneck. The fire trucks stopped, unable to proceed. I turned off the snow blower and walked down to the street. One of the firefighters, a young guy with a thick mustache, climbed out of the cab. "Sir, we need to get through here. There's a medical emergency on Oakwood Drive." "I'm clearing it now," I said, gesturing to my snow blower. "Give me about 30 minutes. We don't have 30 minutes. He pulled out his radio and called it in. I felt a twist in my stomach. Someone was having a medical emergency, and my petty revenge against the HOA was blocking emergency access. But I also knew I hadn't done anything wrong. I was clearing my driveway during allowed hours, as fast as I reasonably could. "I'm going as fast as I can," I said. "I can't do it any faster without violating the HOA noise rules." The firefighter looked at me like I'd grown a second head. "What?" "The HOA fined me for clearing snow too early with a snow blower. So now I'm only clearing during non-quiet hours." "Are you serious right now?" Before I could answer, 2 more vehicles arrived. An ambulance, also stuck behind the fire trucks, and Karen's white Lexus. She jumped out of her car, her face red. "What is going on here?" she demanded. The firefighter turned to her. "Are you HOA?" "I'm the president, yes." "Your roads aren't clear. We can't get to an emergency." "That's because Mr. Fischer here refused to clear his driveway in a timely manner." "I'm clearing it right now," I said. "During the hours I'm allowed to use a snow blower. If you'd like me to clear it earlier, maybe don't fine me $300 for doing exactly that." Karen's face went from red to purple. "This is outrageous. You're endangering people." "No, the HOA's contradictory rules are endangering people," I shot back. "You can't have it both ways. Either snow removal is a priority for emergency access or quiet hours are absolute. Pick one." The firefighter held up his hands. "Look, I don't care about your HOA drama. We need this street clear now. We're going to have to go around, use Pinecrest Avenue." "That adds 10 minutes, the ambulance driver called out. "I know. Let's move." The emergency vehicles carefully backed up, their warning beeps echoing through the cold air, and headed out to find another route. Karen and I stood there in the sudden quiet. "You did this on purpose," she said, her voice shaking with rage. "I followed the rules exactly as written," I said. "If the rules create unsafe conditions, that's not my fault. That's the HOA's fault for creating contradictory bylaws. You're going to regret this." She stormed back to her car and peeled out, her tires slipping on the packed snow. I went back to clearing my driveway, but my hands were shaking. Someone was having a medical emergency, and I delayed help getting to them. The fact that I was technically right didn't make me feel any better about it. I found out later that day that old Mrs. Patterson on Oakwood Drive had fallen and broken her hip. The delay in emergency response hadn't caused any serious complications. She was going to be fine, but the extra 10 minutes had been stressful for everyone involved. I felt terrible about it, but I also felt vindicated. The HOA's rules were the problem, not me. That vindication lasted until Monday, March 2nd, when I received a certified letter from the HOA's attorney. The letter informed me that I was being fined $5,000 for willful obstruction of emergency vehicle access and endangering community welfare. Additionally, The HOA was filing a lien against my property for the unpaid $300 fine from January, plus late fees, which now totaled $450. I was given 10 days to pay or face additional legal action. I called a lawyer that afternoon. His name was Steven Rodriguez, and he specialized in HOA disputes. I'd found him during my earlier research, and his website promised aggressive defense against HOA overreach. I met with him on Tuesday morning at his office in downtown Boulder. He was in his 40s, sharp-featured, with graying hair and intense brown eyes. I told him the whole story, from the first violation to the emergency vehicle incident. He listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair. "Okay, here's the situation. The HOA is absolutely overreaching. Their bylaws create an impossible standard. You are following the letter of the law, and they can't fine you for their own poor planning. However, they're also going to argue that you acted in bad faith, that you knew your actions would block emergency access, and that you did it anyway." "I was clearing my driveway as soon as I was allowed to," I said. "I know, but intent matters." "Did you know the emergency vehicles would be blocked?" I hesitated. "I knew it was possible. I'd noticed the street layout." Steven nodded slowly. "That's going to be a problem. If they can prove you deliberately created a dangerous situation, even if you were technically following their rules, you could be liable." "So what do I do?" "First, don't pay anything. Second, we file a counter-complaint. The HOA's bylaws are contradictory and unenforceable. We argue that they create an impossible standard, and that any reasonable person would be confused about how to comply. We also point out that the HOA failed in its duty to ensure emergency vehicle access by not addressing the street layout issues. Third, we demand they revise their bylaws to remove the contradiction." "How much is this going to cost me?" "Retainer is $3,000. This could go to court, in which case we're looking at $10,000 to $15,000 total, maybe more." I winced. But what choice did I have? "Let's do it." Over the next 2 weeks, Steven filed our response. The HOA doubled down, filing an injunction to force me to pay the fines and threatening foreclosure on my house if I didn't comply. It was psychological warfare, and it was working. I wasn't sleeping well. I was stressed at work, and every day I came home expecting to find another threatening letter. The case was set for a preliminary hearing on March 24th at the Boulder County Court. In the meantime, I became persona non grata in Pine Ridge. Some neighbors avoided me. Others gave me dirty looks. A few people, like George, remained friendly, but even he kept his distance. March 24th arrived gray and cold. Steven and I met at the courthouse at 8:30 a.m. Karen was there with the HOA's lawyer, a slick-looking guy in his 50s named Walter Brennan, who lived in Pine Ridge and had been on the HOA board until recently. The hearing was before Judge Linda Vasquez, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s with a reputation for fairness. We all stood as she entered. "This is a preliminary hearing for Fischer versus Pine Ridge Homeowners Association," she began. "We're here to determine if there's sufficient cause to proceed with the HOA's claims and to address the defendant's counter-complaint." "Mr. Brennan, you're representing the HOA?" "Yes, Your Honor." "Mr. Rodriguez, you're representing Mr. Fischer?" "Yes, Your Honor." "Let's start with the HOA's claims. Mr. Brennan, summarize your position." Walter Brennan stood, straightening his tie. "Your Honor, this is a simple case of a homeowner willfully violating community standards and endangering public safety. Mr. Fischer was fined for a noise violation, refused to pay, and then deliberately blocked emergency vehicle access in retaliation. His actions resulted in a 10-minute delay in emergency medical response, which could have had tragic consequences. The HOA is seeking enforcement of its fines and damages for Mr. Fischer's reckless behavior. Judge Vasquez turned to Stephen. Mr. Rodriguez, Stephen stood. Your Honor, this case is about an HOA that has created contradictory and unenforceable bylaws, then weaponized those bylaws against a homeowner who dared to challenge them. Mr. Fischer was initially fined for clearing his driveway too early, before 8 a.m. When he later cleared his driveway starting exactly at 8 a.m., as the bylaws require, he was blamed for emergency vehicles being delayed. The HOA has created a catch-22 where compliance is impossible. Additionally, the emergency vehicle access issue is a direct result of poor subdivision planning by the HOA and the developers, not Mr. Fischer's snow removal timing. I've reviewed the bylaws, Judge Vasquez said, looking at her computer screen. Section 14 does appear to have some contradictory language. Mr. Brennan, how does the HOA reconcile the requirement for timely snow removal with the noise ordinance? Your Honor, reasonable people use shovels during quiet hours or clear their driveways the evening before, as snowfall permits. Mr. Fischer's driveway is approximately 150 feet long, Stephen interjected. Manually shoveling 2 feet of snow would take 3 to 4 hours of intensive labor. That's not reasonable, especially when he owns a snow blower specifically for this purpose. Judge Vasquez made a note. Let's talk about the emergency vehicle incident. Mr. Rodriguez, what's your client's position on what happened? Mr. Fischer began clearing his driveway at 8:01 a.m., exactly when the bylaws permitted use of powered snow removal equipment. The emergency vehicles arrived approximately 3 minutes later. He was actively clearing the snow when they arrived and offered to continue, but they chose to find an alternate route. At no point did he refuse to clear the snow or deliberately block access. He was simply following the HOA's own rules. Did Mr. Fischer know that his uncleared driveway could block emergency access? The judge asked. This was the critical question. Stephen glanced at me, then back at the judge. Mr. Fischer was aware that the street narrowed near his property. However, he had no reason to believe emergency vehicles would arrive at that specific time, and he was complying with HOA bylaws by waiting until 8 a.m. to use his snow blower. Your Honor, Walter Brennan jumped in, Mr. Fischer has admitted to other parties that he deliberately planned this to retaliate against the HOA. We have witness statements. What witnesses? Stephen demanded. Mrs. Northfield observed Mr. Fischer acting suspiciously in the days before the snowstorm, taking measurements of his driveway and the street width. I felt my stomach drop. That was true. I had measured the street, though I'd done it weeks earlier during my research. Your Honor, Stephen said quickly, even if Mr. Fischer was aware that the street was narrow, that doesn't change the fact that he was following the HOA's bylaws. You cannot punish someone for legal compliance. Judge Vasquez held up her hand. Here's what I'm seeing. The HOA bylaws are poorly written and create conflicting requirements. That's on the HOA, not Mr. Fischer. However, if Mr. Fischer deliberately created a dangerous situation, even while technically complying with the bylaws, that could constitute reckless endangerment. I need more information. She shuffled some papers. I'm ordering the following. First, the HOA fines are stayed pending resolution of this case. No foreclosure proceedings, no liens. Second, I want an independent review of the Pine Ridge bylaws by a neutral HOA management company. I want a report on whether the bylaws are enforceable as written. Third, I want a full investigation into the emergency vehicle access issue. If the subdivision layout is inherently problematic, that needs to be addressed. We'll reconvene in 60 days. The gavel came down. We all stood as the judge left. Walter Brennan shot me a look that could have melted steel. Karen, sitting behind him, looked equally furious. Outside the courthouse, Stephen clapped me on the shoulder. That went about as well as we could have hoped. The judge sees the problem with the bylaws. But Paul, I need to ask you directly, did you deliberately set this up? I met his eyes. I followed the rules, that's all I did. He studied me for a moment, then nodded. Okay, just be careful. If they can prove intent, this gets a lot more complicated. The next 60 days were tense. The independent review was conducted by a company called Colorado HOA Management Solutions. They sent a team to Pine Ridge, interviewed residents, reviewed all the bylaws and violations from the past 5 years, and examined the subdivision layout. Meanwhile, I kept my head down. I didn't attend HOA meetings. I paid all my other dues on time, and I made sure my property was immaculate. Another small snowstorm came through in early April, and I cleared my driveway at exactly 8 a.m., documenting everything with photos and timestamps. Karen tried to bait me a few times. She sent me notices about minor violations. Things like my trash can being visible from the street 15 minutes too long, or my garage door being open during non-essential hours, whatever that meant. Stephen sent formal responses to each one, politely but firmly pointing out that the violations were either frivolous or based on non-existent bylaws. The report from Colorado HOA Management Solutions came back in mid-May. Stephen got a copy and called me immediately. Paul, you need to see this. It's bad for the HOA. I drove to his office that afternoon. He had the report printed out, all 47 pages of it, highlighted in multiple colors. The short version, he said, is that Pine Ridge has been operating way outside normal HOA standards for years. The bylaws are a mess, full of contradictions and unenforceable provisions. They've issued over 200 violations in the past 5 years, most of them questionable. And here's the kicker. There's evidence that the fines are being used to supplement the HOA's operating budget in ways that aren't properly disclosed. What does that mean? I asked. It means they might be committing fraud. HOA fees are supposed to cover specific services and maintenance. But if they're deliberately creating violations to generate revenue, that's illegal. Holy shit. There's more. The report confirms that the subdivision layout is problematic for emergency vehicle access. There are 3 major bottleneck points, including your street. The HOA has known about this for at least 3 years because the fire department sent them a letter in 2023 requesting that the street be widened or that parking be restricted during winter months. The HOA never responded. I leaned back in my chair, processing this. So they knew there was an access problem and did nothing about it. Exactly. And then they tried to blame you when it became an issue. The report recommends a complete rewrite of the bylaws and an audit of the HOA's finances. What happens now? We go back to court on May 20th. With this report, I'm confident we can get all the fines dismissed. I'm also going to recommend that you file a counter-suit for harassment and legal fees. May 20th came around fast. The courtroom was more crowded this time. Several other Pine Ridge residents had shown up. Apparently word had spread about the report. I recognized a few faces, including the Hendersons and the Patels that George had mentioned. Judge Vasquez entered, and we all stood. I've reviewed the report from Colorado HOA Management Solutions, she began. It's quite damning. Mr. Brennan, has the HOA board reviewed this report? Walter Brennan stood. He looked less confident than last time. Yes, Your Honor, The board disputes some of the findings. Which findings specifically? The report characterizes normal HOA enforcement activities as excessive. The board believes the report is biased in favor of the defendant. Judge Vasquez raised an eyebrow. The report was commissioned by this court and conducted by an independent third party with no stake in the outcome. Unless you have specific factual errors to point out, I'm going to give it significant weight. Brennan sat down without responding. Here's my ruling, Judge Vasquez continued. The Pine Ridge HOA bylaws, as currently written, are contradictory and unenforceable regarding the snow removal and noise ordinance provisions. Mr. Fischer's initial fine of $300 is dismissed. The subsequent fine of $5,000 is also dismissed, as Mr. Fischer was attempting to comply with the bylaws as written. Additionally, I'm ordering the HOA to pay Mr. Fischer's legal fees, which I understand total approximately $12,000 to date. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. Stephen squeezed my shoulder. Furthermore, the judge continued, I'm ordering a complete audit of the Pine Ridge HOA's finances for the past 5 years. Based on the information in this report, there are questions about how violation fines have been collected and used. The Colorado State Attorney General's office will be notified to determine if further investigation is warranted. Karen, sitting in the gallery, turned pale. Finally, the HOA is ordered to address the emergency vehicle access issues identified in the report within 90 days. Failure to do so will result in daily fines of $500. This court takes public safety very seriously. The gavel came down. The courtroom erupted in quiet conversations. Several residents approached me afterward, apologizing for how they'd treated me and thanking me for standing up to Karen. George shook my hand vigorously. You did it, Paul. You actually did it. I felt vindicated but also exhausted. This had taken 5 months of my life, thousands of dollars in legal fees that I might or might not get back, and enormous stress. But it wasn't over. The state attorney general's investigation moved quickly. Within 2 weeks, auditors descended on the HOA office. What they found was shocking. Karen had been systematically embezzling money from the HOA for at least 4 years. The violation fines were part of it. She'd been issuing excessive fines and pocketing a portion of the payments. But she'd also been billing the HOA for services that were never performed, paying herself consulting fees that weren't authorized, and using the HOA credit card for personal expenses. The total amount was over $300,000. On June 18, 2026, Karen Northfield was arrested at her home. The charges included theft, embezzlement, fraud, and abuse of fiduciary duty. The arrest made the local news, and the story spread through Pine Ridge like wildfire. I watched the news coverage from my living room, feeling a complex mix of emotions. I'd never intended to uncover criminal activity. I just wanted to clear my driveway without being fined for it. But by standing up to Karen's unreasonable enforcement, I'd pulled on a thread that unraveled years of corruption. The HOA board immediately suspended Karen and appointed an interim president. They hired a professional management company to oversee operations while they sorted out the mess. The bylaws were completely rewritten, with input from residents. The new snow removal policy was simple and reasonable. Driveways should be cleared within 24 hours of snowfall ending, using whatever method the homeowner preferred, with no restrictions on timing except for genuinely late-night hours like midnight to 6 a.m. The emergency vehicle access issues were addressed. The subdivision paid to widen 3 key bottleneck points, including the area in front of my house. Parking restrictions were put in place during winter months. The fire department was consulted throughout the process. As for me, I eventually received my legal fees back, though it took several months and required more legal wrangling. The HOA's insurance covered it, fortunately, so the other homeowners didn't have to pay out of pocket. Karen's criminal case moved through the court system over the summer. In September, she pled guilty to multiple counts of theft and fraud. She was sentenced to 3 years in prison and ordered to pay full restitution to the HOA, though she'd already spent most of the money and would likely never be able to repay it all. Walter Brennan, the lawyer who'd represented the HOA, faced his own problems. The state bar opened an investigation into whether he'd known about Karen's activities and failed to report them. He ended up settling, accepting a suspension of his law license and agreeing never to represent an HOA again. Life in Pine Ridge slowly returned to normal, or at least a new normal. The community was more engaged now. Residents actually showed up to HOA meetings, asking questions and holding the board accountable. Several new board members were elected, people who were committed to reasonable governance rather than petty enforcement. I stayed in my house. Some people suggested I should move, that too much had happened for me to be comfortable there. But I'd fought for the principle of the thing, for the right to live in my home without arbitrary and contradictory rules. I wasn't going to be driven out. George remained a good friend. We had coffee most Saturday mornings, and he liked to joke that I'd done more to reform the HOA in 6 months than he'd managed in 15 years of living there. You know what the difference was? He said one morning in October, as we sat on his back deck watching the leaves change color. You didn't just accept it. Most people, they get a fine, they grumble, they pay it, they move on. You actually fought. I'm not sure I'd recommend it, I said. It was hell for a while there, maybe, but look what came of it. The rules are better. The corruption is gone. The neighborhood is safer. That's because you didn't back down. I nodded, sipping my coffee. He was right, of course, but I also knew how easily it could have gone the other way. If the judge had ruled differently, if the audit hadn't found the embezzlement, I could have lost my house over a $300 fine for clearing snow. The first major snowstorm of the 2026-2027 winter season hit Pine Ridge in late November. I watched it accumulate overnight, measuring about 14 inches by morning. When I woke up, I looked out at my buried driveway and had a moment of anxiety, remembering everything that had happened. Then I checked the clock. It was 7:30 a.m., well within the new reasonable rules. I bundled up, went outside, and started my snowblower. It roared to life, chewing through the fresh powder. The sound echoed through the quiet morning, and I didn't worry about it for a second. As I cleared the driveway, I saw other neighbors doing the same. Some used snow blowers. Some used shovels. A few had hired services. Nobody cared what anyone else was doing, as long as it got done safely and reasonably. I finished around 8:15 and stood back to admire my work. The driveway was clear, the sidewalk was clear, and the street had been professionally plowed with proper attention to the widened areas. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Steven Rodriguez, my lawyer. Saw the snow forecast. Hope you're staying warm and clearing that driveway whenever the hell you want. Cheers. I laughed and texted back a thumbs up. That afternoon, the new HOA president, a retired engineer named Rita Chen who'd been elected in August, sent out a community-wide email. It thanked everyone for their prompt snow removal and reminded residents about the resources available if anyone needed help clearing their property, particularly elderly or disabled homeowners. It was professional, helpful, and completely free of threats or violation notices. I saved that email. It felt like a small symbol of how much things had changed. Life moved on. The holidays came and went. I hosted Christmas dinner for a few neighbors, including George and his wife Martha. We ate too much, drank too much wine, and laughed about the absurdity of the whole HOA saga. It was starting to feel like something that had happened to someone else, a story I could tell rather than a trauma I was living through. In January 2027, almost exactly a year after the first violation notice had been taped to my door, I received an envelope from the Pine Ridge HOA. For a moment, my heart rate spiked. Then I opened it and saw it was the annual meeting notice and budget report. The budget was transparent, clearly showing where every dollar of HOA fees went. There was even a surplus from the previous year, which was being returned to homeowners as a credit against future dues. I filed the notice away and went about my day. That weekend, I was outside doing some yard work when a young couple walked by with a real estate agent. They were clearly looking at houses in the neighborhood. The agent was giving them the sales pitch about Pine Ridge's amenities and community atmosphere. The couple looked interested until the woman asked, "How's the HOA here? We've heard horror stories about some neighborhoods." The real estate agent hesitated, clearly weighing how to answer. Before she could respond, I called out from my yard, "The HOA's great now. New leadership, reasonable rules, very transparent. You should be fine." The couple looked relieved. The real estate agent shot me a grateful smile. After they walked on, I thought about what I'd said. It was true. The HOA was great now, but it had taken a fight to get there, one I hadn't wanted or expected. Sometimes standing up for something as simple as clearing your own driveway can expose much deeper problems. Sometimes refusing to accept unreasonable rules, even when it's easier to just pay the fine and move on, can lead to real change. I went back to my yard work, pulling weeds and trimming bushes, enjoying the simple pleasure of maintaining my home without worrying about some arbitrary violation notice. The legal battles were over. Karen was in prison, the bylaws were fixed, and the community was healthier for it. I'd gotten my life back, and more than that, I'd helped make Pine Ridge a better place to live. It had started with a $300 fine for clearing snow too efficiently. It had ended with uncovering hundreds of thousands of dollars in embezzlement and reforming an entire HOA system. Not bad for just wanting to get to work on time. As spring approached and the snow finally melted for good, I found myself actually looking forward to the next HOA meeting. Not because I wanted to fight or cause trouble, but because I was curious about what a functional, reasonable HOA looked like in practice. The meeting was held on a Tuesday evening in March. The community center was more crowded than I'd ever seen it, probably 40 or 50 residents in attendance. Rita Chen ran the meeting efficiently, covering budget items, upcoming neighborhood projects, and resident concerns. When she opened the floor for questions, hands actually went up. "I'd like to propose we install a few benches along the walking path," one woman suggested. "It would be nice for people to have places to rest." "Great idea," Rita said, making a note. "Let's form a committee to research options and costs. Anyone interested in joining that committee?" Several hands went up, including mine. "Why not? I lived here. I might as well help make it better." After the meeting, Rita approached me. She was in her 60s, with short gray hair and sharp, intelligent eyes behind rimless glasses. "Paul, I wanted to thank you again for what you did. I know it wasn't easy." "I just didn't want to pay an unfair fine," I said. "Maybe that's how it started." "But you exposed serious problems that needed to be addressed. The whole community is better off because you stood your ground." "I had good legal help," I said, deflecting. "Still, it took courage." She paused. "Have you thought about joining the board?" We're going to have an opening in June when Tom Henderson moves out of state. I considered it. A year ago, I would have said absolutely not. I'd had enough of HOA drama to last a lifetime. But now, with a functional board and reasonable people running things, it might actually be worthwhile. "Let me think about it," I said. She nodded. "No pressure, but you'd be good at it. You care about doing things right and you're not afraid to ask hard questions. That's what we need." I drove home that night thinking about her offer. My house sat quiet and dark on Meadowbrook Lane. The streetlight at the corner illuminated the widened section of road, the fix that had come from all the chaos. Emergency vehicles could get through easily now, even in the worst weather. Inside, I poured myself a drink and sat in my living room. The framed copy of Judge Vasquez's final ruling hung on the wall, something Stephen had suggested I keep as a reminder. I looked at it now, reading the key phrases. Contradictory and unenforceable bylaws. Plaintiff was attempting to comply in good faith. HOA failed in its duty to ensure reasonable governance. It had been a long, difficult fight, but it had been worth it. My phone buzzed with a text from George. "Good meeting tonight. Rita's doing a great job. Maybe there's hope for HOAs after all." I texted back. "Maybe, let's not get crazy." He sent back a laughing emoji. I finished my drink and got ready for bed. Tomorrow was a regular workday. No court appearances, no lawyer meetings, no stress about whether I'd lose my house over snow removal. Just normal life. As I turned off the lights, I thought about the young couple I'd talked to while they were house hunting. I hoped they'd decided to buy in Pine Ridge. It really was a good neighborhood now. The kind of place where the HOA existed to help residents, not harass them. Where rules made sense and were applied fairly. Where you could clear your driveway whenever you needed to without fear of arbitrary fines. It shouldn't have taken a court case and a criminal investigation to get there. But sometimes change only happens when someone refuses to accept the way things are. I'd been that someone. Not because I'd planned it or wanted to be, but because I'd drawn a line at an unfair fine and refused to back down. The next morning, I woke to my alarm and got ready for work. As I backed out of my driveway, I noticed the new HOA sign at the neighborhood entrance. It was tasteful, professional, and included the phrase, "a community of neighbors," rather than the old rules strictly enforced. Small change, but meaningful. I drove to work, had a productive day, and came home that evening to find my trash cans still sitting by the curb where I'd left them that morning. Under the old regime, Karen would have already documented that violation. Now, nobody cared. They'd get moved when I got around to it. I moved them anyway, because it was the right thing to do, not because I feared a fine. That weekend, I attended a neighborhood barbecue that the Patel family hosted. It was the first real social event I'd been to in Pine Ridge since everything happened. I was nervous about going, unsure how people would react to me now that the dust had settled. I shouldn't have worried. People were friendly, welcoming. Several thanked me for what I'd done. Others shared their own stories of ridiculous violations they'd received over the years. Fines for things like lawn grass being a quarter-inch, too tall, or holiday decorations being removed one day late. I got fined $100 because my kid left his bike in the driveway overnight, one father told me. Karen said it was an eyesore. It was there for maybe 8 hours. I got cited because my porch light burned out and I didn't replace it fast enough, another neighbor added. Apparently we have 72 hours to fix exterior lighting issues. I replaced it after 4 days because I was out of town. $50 fine. The stories kept coming, and I realized just how widespread Karen's petty tyranny had been. I'd gotten off relatively easy with just 2 fines. Some of these people had been dealing with constant harassment for years, but they'd paid the fines and suffered in silence because fighting seemed too hard, too expensive, too unlikely to succeed. "You gave us our neighborhood back," one woman said to me, her eyes actually tearing up. I know that sounds dramatic, but it's true. We were all living in fear of what she'd find next. Now we can just live here. I didn't know what to say to that. I mumbled something about being glad it worked out, but inside, I felt the weight of what had happened in a new way. This hadn't just been about me and my snow removal. It had been about an entire community being oppressed by someone who'd twisted the rules to serve her own agenda. As the barbecue wound down and the sun set over the mountains, I stood with George on the Patel's back deck, watching kids play in the yard below. "You ever wonder what would have happened if you just paid that first fine?" George asked. "Sometimes," I admitted. "Life would have been simpler." But Karen would still be running things. She'd still be embezzling. The bylaws would still be a mess. "True. You did good, Paul, even if it wasn't what you intended." I nodded. He was right. Sometimes the right thing happens by accident, because someone gets pushed too far and decides to push back. June arrived, bringing warm weather and the HOA board election. Rita had continued to encourage me to run for the open seat, and after much thought, I'd agreed to put my name on the ballot. 2 other people were also running, both long-time residents who seemed reasonable and committed to continuing the reforms. The election was conducted by mail-in ballot, and the results were announced at the June meeting. I won with 68% of the vote. I was now officially on the Pine Ridge HOA board. My first meeting as a board member was surreal. I sat at the long table where Karen had once presided, but everything about it felt different. We discussed practical matters like getting the pool ready for summer, organizing a community garage sale, and reviewing bids for repainting the entrance sign. It was boring, administrative work, exactly what an HOA board should be doing. Nobody proposed fining anyone for anything. At one point, Rita brought up a concern from a resident about a neighbor's dog barking late at night. Under the old system, this would have resulted in immediate violations and fines. Now, Rita simply asked if anyone knew the residents involved and could have a friendly conversation with them about the issue. George, who was also on the board, volunteered. "I know them. I'll stop by and chat. It's probably just a training issue with a new puppy." And that was it. Problem solving through communication, not punishment. Revolutionary, as summer progressed, I settled into my role as a board member. It was more time-consuming than I'd expected, but also oddly satisfying. We were actually making the neighborhood better, organizing events, maintaining common areas, and helping residents when issues came up. In August, we received notice that Karen's criminal case had reached its conclusion. She'd been released from prison after serving a reduced sentence for good behavior, but she was on probation for 5 years and had been ordered to continue making restitution payments. She'd also been permanently banned from serving on any HOA board in Colorado. She didn't return to Pine Ridge. From what I heard through the grapevine, she'd moved to Wyoming to live with her sister. Fine by me. I had no interest in ever seeing her again. The first anniversary of my initial snow violation passed in early January 2028. There was snow on the ground that day, about 6 inches from an overnight storm. I cleared my driveway at 7:30 in the morning, finishing just in time to see the school bus drive past on the nicely widened street. No violation notice appeared on my door. No angry HOA president took photos. Nobody cared. I went to work, came home, and lived my life. It was wonderfully, perfectly normal. That evening I got a call from Steven Rodriguez, my lawyer. We'd stayed in touch occasionally over the past year and a half, mostly just checking in. Paul, I wanted to let you know something. That case you were involved in, it's being used as a precedent. What do you mean? Another HOA case in Denver. Similar situation, contradictory bylaws, excessive fines. The homeowner's lawyer cited Judge Vasquez's ruling in your case. It's helping them. I felt a strange sense of pride. That's good. It is. Your fight is helping other people now. Just thought you'd want to know. After we hung up, I sat with that information for a while. My stand against an unfair fine had rippled outward, creating change beyond just my neighborhood. Other people, trapped in similar situations with other tyrannical HOAs, were being helped by the legal precedent my case had established. Maybe that was the real victory. Not just fixing Pine Ridge, but helping to fix a broken system that gave petty tyrants too much power over people's homes and lives. As I sit here now, writing this all down, it's been over 2 years since that first violation notice appeared on my door. Pine Ridge is thriving. The HOA functions smoothly and fairly. Neighbors actually like living here. And I've learned something important about standing up for yourself, even when it's hard, even when it seems easier to just give in. Sometimes you have to fight. Not because you want to, but because the alternative is accepting injustice. And if you're lucky, if you're persistent, if you refuse to back down, you might just win. And in winning, you might help more people than you ever imagined. All because I wanted to clear my driveway and get to work on time. The snow still falls every winter in Colorado. I still clear my driveway with my trusty snow blower, and I never, ever worry about when I do it. That freedom, that simple ability to maintain my own property without fear or harassment, was worth every moment of the fight.